Hi, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners, looking at the investment markets. Certainly in the US, a pretty big week, obviously starting with the acquittal of President Trump in the impeachment trial. That was never really in doubt, given that the Republicans have the majority in the Senate. There were no witnesses called, and really became a bit of a sort of a joke trial really in the end. There was only one Republican that voted in favor of the impeachment. That was Mitt Romney. Now, President Trump was obviously pretty quick to get onto the social media bandwagon, really, totally vindicated, really a witch hunt, etc., etc. That was then sort of followed up with the State of the Union speech. Again, some interesting facts coming out of that. Some of them were correct, some of them were maybe a little bit wide of the mark. But what is clear is that the US economy certainly is pushing on at a pretty good rate. The latest jobs data was showing over 200,000 jobs created. That's really pretty punchy as we're into sort of the third or fourth year of a major sort of expansion in the US economy. Really it's pushing on at a pretty good rate. There's reasonable growth going forward. Still pretty benign inflation. And that's potentially maybe a little bit of a sort of Goldilocks scenario for the Fed, that you've got reasonable growth but low inflation. Now, obviously, much of that has been buoyed by the recent sort of trade deal with China. Also, corporate earnings coming out of the US are also pretty strong as well. But really, you've got to put a little bit of a question mark against that sort of caveat, given this sort of coronavirus and really the sort of lack of sort of a cure, certainly, and also a vaccine at present. But certainly markets seem to be pretty much ignoring it. At present, for every down day you have, the market pretty quickly recovers. There's still the ongoing threat of the coronavirus. So we see more cases coming through, more deaths coming through. Although, certainly compared with other sort of diseases, most notably sort of SARS, the mortality rate is much lower. So although you have more deaths from the coronavirus, in terms of the actual people infected to the death rate, it's much lower than SARS. Now, obviously, still really too early to tell what the actual impact will be on the global economy. Most analysts, economists, expect a bit of a slowdown for first quarter. That's pretty much a given. And it's just a question of how quickly authorities can get in front of this and sort of try and contain it, control it, and then obviously come up with a cure or a vaccine for it. Now, also in the US, obviously you've got the start of the sort of election process. The Iowa caucus for the Democrats really turned into a bit of a sort of mockery, really. Results were unclear. There was a bit of a technical glitch. When the sort of dust settled, what was surprising was firstly how poorly Joe Biden did. Most people were expecting him to be a front runner. After the Iowa caucus, really the two sort of front runners, which may be a little bit of a surprise, was Bernie Sanders, and then way out of left field was Pete Buttigieg. So now going into the New Hampshire primary, it'll just be interesting to see how those two sort of front runners perform. And really, obviously, all eyes then sort of heading into Super Tuesday on March the 3rd. And interestingly, that'll be the first ballot that Michael Bloomberg is on. So it'll just be interesting to see how he does in those sort of polls, because certainly at present, maybe the impact hasn't been as great as he anticipated, although as yet he hasn't been on any of the ballots yet. Certainly quite a bit for the market to digest, but I say at present, it seems to be ignoring the coronavirus, viewing that as maybe sort of a temporary sort of glitch, a bit of a speed bump, and really looking sort of further down the road, obviously the election, the US economy, and and how companies are performing out there. In the UK, Boris Johnson and his government is now sort of pushing on sort of post-Brexit. Quite a bit of talk about sort of tax-free ports. That's going to be quite interesting because, clearly there is no sort of magic there. If there was, then, there will be sort of 40-odd thousand tax-free ports around the world. So maybe that is just maybe a little bit of a sort of spin, really. Talking about a high-speed train link as well. And it's just going to be interesting to see how this all plays through. But really looking at the UK, there's very little difference in the UK, sort of post-Brexit, to as it was sort of mid-January before the Brexit date actually came to fruition. Australia facing fresh sort of climate issues, just 2 to 3 weeks on from sort of raging fires and various sort of cities in real danger, having sort of fires encroaching on them. You've now got horrendous rain, floods, storms, etc., and causing quite a bit of damage. On the plus side, it's putting out many of the fires, and most sort of analysts now expect most of the fires to be put out by the end of the week, given the rain that's falling. But now I say you've got the ongoing issue with sort of flooding and the sort of damage being caused by the excessive rainfall. Here in New Zealand, the Reserve Bank meet this week. No one's really looking for a rate cut, a very small percentage, maybe sort of, 5-6%, something like that. Although what is interesting is that, most of the markets and analysts are looking for maybe August time. There's about a 70% chance of a rate cut. Now, obviously, quite a bit of time between now and August, but looking at it, certainly the housing market is still pretty strong. Sort of rising housing prices, that's pushing sort of consumer confidence up a little bit. But then against that, you've got obviously, the issues of the coronavirus. You've got a little bit of issues in terms of lack of sort of demand for sort of forestry, etc. Milk so far, products are sort of okay-ish. But obviously the dairy farmers as well are suffering a little bit with this sort of ongoing drought, certainly in the North Island here. So really a little bit of a mixed sort of picture here for New Zealand in terms of, sort of economic news out there. And this is going to be interesting to see how it sort of plays through in the next sort of couple of months. Now on the political front, a little bit of fresh pressure coming onto the government with the coalition, and it's just going to be interesting again to see how that sort of plays through. Certainly the latest polls put Labour and Nationals sort of pretty much neck and neck, with the Greens managing to get over that 5%, but all the other parties are under that 5%, so wouldn't really get any seats on the proportional representation. Now again, for investors looking for income, it is pretty tough out there in this sort of low interest environment. And if you are looking for alternatives than what is available, so call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.